Thanks for sticking around and joining us for the breakout session on marine and freshwater ecosystems. My name is Max Sadnowski. I am a Sea Grant Extension faculty and working with PI-CASC. Thanks for joining us today. So I hope you enjoyed the program so far. I want to all let you know, and I think you might see that there on the shared screen, that this session will be recorded. So let me just go over a little bit about this session format. So the discussion session is your opportunity to share your thoughts and takeaways from the summit thus far, and to collectively identify any gaps or any needs for science in support of climate change adaptation efforts, as well as the next step for PI-CASC and our science partners. We're going to be using a combination today of online polling through menti.com and a facilitated group discussion. Just want to say a thank you to my colleague, Kristen, who's helping us with the technical side of the presentation today. So Kristen, thank you very much. So I just want to talk a little bit about a few logistics and some housekeeping for the meeting today. We're hoping that you can keep yourself muted for the time being, and that we're also hoping that you go ahead and turn on your cameras so when we have our discussion, we can see who's talking. So feedback during the discussion can be provided verbally by raising your hand in the chat window of the Zoom meeting, or physically raising your hand so we can see you over video. Okay, so let's move on to the next session. So if all of you could open menti.com, either in another window on your computer or on another device, your smartphone. Please don't close the Zoom meeting. Please try to open the Menti in another window. You should have the menti.com information in the chat box. That'll be the link to menti.com and the 6-digit code. And so what we're going to do is we're going to see if you can all log in, and we'll wait a few minutes to see if everyone can get in. Thank you. All right, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and go through the questions on menti.com. We'll start with question 1. So question 1 is, in 1 or 2 words, please share an inspiring or thought-provoking takeaway from the lightning talks on sea level rise and coastal resilience. And you should see those responses populating on the screen. So we have biocultural, cesspools are popping up, high resolution data, fish, awesome science, nervous future. All right, so it looks like we've received all our responses for the first question. So we're gonna go ahead and move on to the second question. So our second question is, what enables science to be actionable in your research and/or resource management? So this response, you can submit multiple responses if you'd like. It's going to come up as word bubbles. And feel free to provide as many responses as you'd like. All right, so we're seeing a lot of similar responses here: money, community support, partnerships, communication. So I think we've received quite a lot of responses. I think we're going to move to a discussion. We're going to move back to the gallery view. So you can go ahead and raise your hand in the chat screen, or go ahead just here in the video window. Please tell us what you think, or we have an opportunity to expand on some of those responses. Darren or Yingpeng, any thoughts?
Might be helpful, Max. Are you, or maybe it's Kristen, are you able to show the results of those slides? Maybe you can't do them both multiple, or the questions themselves, perhaps.
I mean, I guess
don't know if you are.
Yeah, I mean, the reflection I had on this one was that nearly all of them are about partnerships, communication with stakeholders, right? And I think that that was a big theme of yesterday. The other one, the second slide, but yeah.
Yeah, I noticed too that one way or the other, you're seeing partnership and communication, community engagement. Yeah, over and over.
I mean, what I see we don't have here very as strongly as like well, maybe it's just because people use one word partnership, but of like this connections with state agencies and like more formal governance, right? It seems to be very grassroots. I might be interpreting it wrong.
There was a question here, and I think it was for Dr. Wagner. I'm not sure if she's with us here today, but it's you know, related to partnerships. It was asking about describing a process for determining which partners to involve, and maybe some challenges that some of you have had in your research connecting with those partners.
Kristen or Max, I forget which one's controlling. Jim wrote in the chat if you can scroll down to see the remaining responses on this current Menti that you're showing.
Okay.
And I think, you know, another interesting thing, Max, I would offer that goes along with what you've just relayed from a question that somebody had is, you know, what do you do with when you have, you know, some number of stakeholders, but they're not necessarily on the same page in terms of what they see, you know, those needs, what those needs might be, or even in the case of, you know, engaging with universities and science or federal research agencies and their science, you know, you may get groups in a certain area focused on a, you know, some topic, but not necessarily in agreement, and how, you know, I think it's I don't know if folks that are participating in this have run into that or not. As an agency or an organization, we certainly have, and it gets pretty complex in a hurry. I don't know if folks have thoughts on that.
I also see a lot of data and funding here.
Sorry, Infan, you said you do see data and funding.
Yeah, I was talking about, I think, yeah, this slide also show, of course, we know money will be definitely something we needed, but also data, right? The data seems lacking or inadequate to address those signs, especially in this area. Sorry about my background.
Is that existing data for these agencies and organizations in the areas that you're working, or it's new data that we need to work on?
I feel well, it would be nice, the data already there, right? I think a lot of agencies nowadays really willing to support the existing data to do effort. But then they are definitely some lacking, especially in this area, that new data need to be collected. That's how I interpret it based on like today's talk and what I'm seeing here.
There was another question here about, you know, about how we communicate the findings to our community members. Do we build that into our research proposals as a key component?
It seems that only recently, and when I say recently, I'm just going to pick the number last 10 years, that funding agencies have really pushed for that, or beginning, you know, some of them are only just beginning. Others are a little further along in making that a requirement or component of proposals and funding opportunities. But it is a, you know, it certainly seems to be a trend moving in the right direction. And it depends on the field too, of course.
I think scientists have a lot to learn from extension agents in the regard of all the outreach. Like we tend to go for, you know, more research, more data, right? The stuff we know how to do. And it's scary once you're confronted with people who, you know, you need to interpret for and kind of redesign your research based on what their needs are. So it's been, for me, it's been really useful being in a department with extension agents and having their brains to pick and partnering with managers who take community and stakeholder engagement really seriously and understand the difference between the learning and like the loops and how to do it.
I just
We all have
want
to
to
put
go
in
on
our
record.
proposals.
I
Sorry,
just
go
want
ahead,
to go on
Darren.
record and say I did not pay Kristen to say that.
So, Kirsten, I completely agree with you on that. I think what's the harder thing is getting most, especially faculty researchers, you know, out of that, you know, out of the lab and into public meetings. And I think that's where we do need to spend more of our effort collectively, is helping especially junior faculty become part of the public, because we should be. And there are some good mechanisms of doing that. I don't think many universities are doing it well. There's a few good models out there, but I think we need to focus on that a lot more, especially when we're talking about climate science, because too many people, the public, don't understand even when they support it. You know, so we're just not effective communicators. Maybe we're better at ineffective communication, and we need to work on that a lot more.
Thanks, Jim. Anyone else have any thoughts on any examples of how they integrated communication into their proposals or research?
I can share a recent experience that I had. I was invited to join a civic proposal, which is a really rare opportunity because it's an NSF, which is usually research focused, but they actually want to engage community. And originally I thought I would be there and say something about, yeah, we can do this, we can do that, but actually entire meeting, which we only doing it for proposal, and the community was telling us that what can be done, and it was fascinating. And they all know where the rain gauge or where the stream is likely to be flood, and we just need to be there and basically they've been there. So it's quite a fascinating experience for me, even just for the proposal.
I know that you know, we've been talking recently about some of the challenges during COVID to be able to, you know, connect with the community on this research and on this information that we're collecting. Is there anyone have any examples of other creative ways that they've been able to you know, get in touch with the community to share their information?
Oh, I guess one last year, even pre-COVID, we ran a monthly webinar with homeowners in upcountry Maui worried about cesspools, and had kind of formed a formal informal advisory group. You know, anybody could join, but we targeted certain people, and we just held these webinars, and we plucked off different parts of the project to explain it, whether it was the groundwater model that we went into great detail, and we warned them ahead of time, you know, it's going to be technical. So, but then other times it was more discussion around the issues. And I think people really appreciated it. I don't think they like, they still don't like the Department of Health, but you know, they appreciated the process.
All right, Kirsten, thank you so much for sharing. Amara, we're going to try to move on to the next two Menti questions. So we're going to have you get back into the menti.com window. We're going to put up the next two questions. And so the question is, what is the top climate change adaptation resource management need that we should be addressing? And you can go ahead and submit your answers, your thoughts on multiple if you'd like. And then if you have any questions on any of the responses or would like to elaborate on those, please go ahead and feel free to put those questions in the chat. Because I saw managed retreat, and it looks like we're seeing how we handle the managed retreat. Living shorelines, green infrastructure. How do we implement change? Thanks for scrolling down, Kristen. I think all the responses are coming in. All right, would any of our panelists like to elaborate on any of the topics? Oh, looks like we're moving on to the next question, which is, what are the most important next steps after this science summit? And I think you can also select up to 4 of these topics. All right, it looks like we have some coming in now. Looks like we're continuing that focus on relationships or partnerships with a lot of selections for long-term and sustained investment and networking with our local stakeholders. Also, more needs assessment with our local stakeholders. I saw some information in the chat earlier that was discussing our relationships and partnerships between research and management, and are these projects or research that we're conducting useful? All right, so it looks like we've seen all of the selections come in now. Chris, could we switch back to the first question and some of the replies? Or the third question? Thank you. All right, so let's take a look. Can we talk about how do we implement change? Can whoever made that response, would you like to elaborate on that?
Oh, sure. Call me out.
Thanks, Darren.
Yeah. I mean, it's the hardest part. And, you know, you heard today a lot of examples of some great science. You heard today a lot of examples of managers that are using that science to an extent. But, you know, with a kind of a bit of a myopic view, you know, living here on Oahu, you know, one of the big questions, like which hotel is going to be the first one to give up beach access and the shoreline? It's just not there. So I think you know, and that's just one example. There's so many of where we continue to develop great science and provide that great science to policymakers, decision makers, stakeholders, et cetera. And there's so much on the table, again, with this kind of myopic view, excuse the view of Oahu for the moment, but how does it get implemented? I think we need more social science integrated with some of the physical and natural sciences that we're doing, so that we can help better understand how to get essentially what is behavioral change. How do we tap into what motivates builders? What motivates various aspects of the economy to move in different directions? How do we implement? Hence the all caps. I yelled it at you, screamed it at you.
I heard you loud and clear there, and it seems like you know, a lot of that information might be related to some of the responses we're seeing about managed retreat. How do we manage? How do we manage retreat? How do we move in that direction?
I think if that's an honest question, we we're going to need to completely change zoning, right? And I think the planning department will have to step up and make really hard choices. And but yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar question of how we're going to do that. But other places are doing it, so I mean, maybe there are lessons to be brought.
Yeah, I agree, Kirsten. I mean, planning is definitely one of the big keys, and permitting being the biggest key, because it's all about what is allowed and what is not allowed. I think the challenge, though, is that those that are often making those decisions are also looking to get reelected, for instance. And then you have these large constituencies that don't support. So again, you know, how do you put in place all the motivating factors to get these various entities to move, but to move in a common direction? You know, so you've got developers, politicians, planners, scientists, other community groups, etc. And how do each one of those groups has along a path of getting to one common point might all have different motivating factors to get there, right?
There's a comment in the chat. It says there's a real need to identify linkages between resources and communities through ecosystem or ecological services, and use that to better inform adaptation strategies. So interdisciplinary research is very important. Thank you. See, Kristen, can we move on to the next question and take a look at some of those responses? All right, so it looks like, again, we're seeing the same theme here for long-term and sustained investment in networking with local stakeholders and better collaboration among state and federal partners to build climate change adaptation. Then what I think we were speaking about in one of the last lightning talks was the question about research and management opportunities for students throughout the Pacific to engage around climate change adaptation concerns. And that might go back to the comments that we've seen about developing practical research activities. Does anyone else have any other important next steps after this science summit that weren't included in these selections?
I'll jump into the silence real quick to go back to Jim's earlier comment about incorporating more of this kind of outreach and engagement and things in the research that we do. I equate it in some ways to, at least I would say in many disciplines, if you will, we bring students through graduate degree programs, and when they come out, the goal often, not always, but the goal often is for those graduate students, especially getting PhDs, to go on to work at universities and to do research, but to teach. But often in many of these disciplines, they're never taught to teach at all. And maybe they get a couple of TA, they get thrown into teaching assistantships here and there, and maybe there's a little bit of a workshop on how to approach that. But for the most part, it's just trial by fire. And I equate that in terms of what we do with regard to science and science communication. Our graduate students across physical, natural, social sciences, part of that course curriculum should be science communication. Again, to go back to Jim's comments, I mean, if we're producing more scientists that come out the door seeing science communication as a norm and knowing how to do it well, it really is on us to make that happen.
And Darren, let me follow up with one other statement if I can, and that is that scientists generally aren't the best communicators. And who do we learn from? Well, I must admit that when I first started doing public presentations, which of course I was very afraid to do as a young scientist, it wasn't learning how to talk to other scientists, it was learning to talk to other people, and especially resource managers and also the public. That's a different type of skill set than even talking to other scientists. And what I certainly learned, although it took a decade after I had gotten out of college, to learn that more of that comes from just experience. And I'll share a tiny anecdote on that. We developed one of the first federal marine reserves in the Caribbean, and I thought, this is great. I'll give one presentation, I'll be done, and we'll be marching forward. A decade later, we were still doing the marching and still doing the communicating. So I think I gave pretty close to the same presentation, oh boy, at least 2 or 3 dozen times before I started feeling good about it and actually having local people come up and talk to me about it, and especially fishermen. So it's learning how to communicate repetitively in many ways that's the harder part, not just other scientists and resource managers.
Thanks, Jim. We also have another comment in the chat. It says, I think it's important not just to say communication, but to identify the things that the local stakeholders care about and craft messages, communications around those as we start to build out communications and partnerships. Not just to throw any or all research at them, want to make sure what's really relevant to the community, or how do we make the research relevant or understandable. And maybe that, Jim, in your case, is just taken repetitive conversations with groups and trying to explain the research in a variety of different ways to connect with the community.
All right, looks like we might have lost our host. Although I see him listed twice, so I'm not sure. I don't know. Let's do time check here. I think, yeah, we're supposed to wrap up at 3:40. We'll give Max just a moment to see if he's able to jump back on. But if not, I kind of heard him starting to say something like other thoughts or other things that anybody that is part of the breakout group here wanted to mention or comment on. More people coming in on chat. Keelan responds, I agree, Val and Jim, it's critical to understand the values of each community and the individuals within so that you can better understand how to communicate the appropriate information in a digestible way, pardon me, that resonates with them, not to dumb it down, but to simplify the message is really important. All right, well, if there's no other thoughts or comments, and it seems like we truly have lost poor Max, then thanks, Kristen. Yeah, Kristen's talking about going back, over and over again to community and work through governance and governance issues. And so hopefully everyone, I don't know if Kristen, and sorry, because I've been mixing up my Kristen and Kirsten, which on my Hollywood squares, you guys are like right up next to each other too. So it's made it that much more difficult. I don't know if Kristen has login information. Hopefully you all have the information for the webinar. It's where we began both yesterday and today. And we're gonna go back to the main stage. Oh, and there we go. We've got some linkage in there. So if you look right now, jot down the password if you don't have it. because once you click that link, it's going to ask you if you want to leave this Zoom and go to the other. So we will see you on the other side. Thanks, everybody. See you
Thank
soon.
you.